My name is Alexander. I want to tell you my story about how I could not forgive my wife for cheating on me and committed, as it may seem to some, a terrible act. But I do not regret anything, as I believe that betrayal should be punished, to one degree or another. So I'm 34 years old, living in a fairly large city, working as a private lawyer. For almost 5 years now, I recently moved into the apartment my grandmother left me. In the future, this will play an important role. And in principle, little by little, I cope. But that's not the point now. Let's move on to my biggest disappointment of my life, and the event which turned everything upside down. 4 years ago, I met a charming, and as I thought very kind and innocent girl, Olga. I had to go in to see my new client, and in the office sat a pretty fragile blonde, who immediately attracted my attention, and between us ran a connection, word for word, and we exchanged numbers. We corresponded for about a week, and we agreed to meet to talk and have dinner. Olga told us that she had had a childhood dream of becoming a lawyer, and so she had come from a small backwoods town to go to the law academy. Because where she came from, such an education is extremely difficult to get. She's a sophomore, and she lives with a friend in the dorm, and all her free time, she's studying. That night was special for us. We didn't keep track of time, we just enjoyed each other. From that moment on, things spiraled rapidly between us, and we began a serious relationship. After a while, Olga moved in with me, we started to live together, and everything was fine. We had a lot of things to talk about. I often helped her with her studies, and it was very interesting for me to refresh my knowledge. And an extra load on the brain never hurts. We lived like this for a few years until a terrible thing happened to me, and my usual world changed colors. On the day when I heard this dreadful conversation, I was coming back from another business meeting a little earlier than usual. On entering the apartment, I found that the door was unlocked. My wife's voice rushed to my ear from the kitchen. She was clearly arguing loudly with someone on the phone. I do not love this goat, now the main thing for me to finish college. And no pregnancy from him is out of the question. And I can't have a baby with Kirill right now. We need to finish college first, Olga summed up indignantly. On shaky legs, I quietly left the apartment and went into the yard to get some air, to come to my senses. The shock of what I had heard did not leave my body, and in my head there were dark questions about who Kirill was, and why Olga spoke about me in such a way. If I was doing absolutely everything in my power for her happiness. The resentment burned through my soul, slowly but surely, leaving her no chance for any adequate explanation of her words. I only knew one Cyril from her entourage. He was the head of the group, a candidate for a red diploma. He often used to help her with her studies when I was working or busy. Usually, they did it by video link, or they stayed late after classes at the institute. At least, that's what Olga told me. I trusted her completely, and didn't even think that way. So I never had any doubts. On the contrary, I was only glad that my beloved seeks to realize his dream. It was only now, in the hallway, I heard this dialogue, and realized that over the course she just wanted to get out of the dorm, live with me, and use my own hands to finish college. I'm afraid to even think about what was in her head when she offered to sell my apartment and buy a house on the outskirts of the city. And in that moment, everything became clear to me. Of course, realizing this was crucial for me, which was why I was now living more or less at peace. But nevertheless, I wanted revenge. I didn't even care if she was cheating on me, in fact, or not. I felt like a used puppet they just wanted to ride to a better life. I had no trouble coming up with a plan of action to destroy her life, for I knew that her main weakness was her studies. If she didn't graduate from the institute she was attending for free and flunked out, she'd probably end up with, at best, a free ticket office somewhere on a football court. And at worst, it's back to the outback to dig potatoes with her mom. And ironically, she has a state exam in a week, where she will need my help as usual. I'm sure her head teacher will will be busy with her own preparations. Since most of the tasks I did for her, she will not be able to pass this exam on her own. Therefore, a month before the exam, Olga ordered a microoral tube, in which I will tell her the right answers during the state exam. This week was very hard for me because I had to pretend to be a loving husband. By the way, every time I was surprised at how easy it was for my wife. Exam day came, my wife drew out a ticket, whispered the question to me, and began to wait. And in response, I said to her, "You know, dear, I may be a jerk somewhere from whom you do not want children, but I will not let you become a lawyer because you have to protect people from you." At my words, Olga became instantly hysterical. She tried to take out her earpiece to get rid of my voice, and at that moment, one of the committee members noticed her earpiece falling out of her ear. And the last thing I heard was that she would be expelled in the coming term. When she returned home, she cried and screamed that I had ruined her life and destroyed her dream. Fortunately, her things were already at the door, and I did not have to listen to this for a long time. Of course, in the near future, we divorced and she went to her home. And I, retrained in family matters, and now do everything to help other people. Story 2. Anton, I will not go against my mother. What will my parents think of me? Shouted wife, Oksana. Why are you always worried about what they will say? And such conversations between spouses were not uncommon. Oksana was an only child in the family, very spoiled. And closer to the age of 20, she was tired of the constant tutelage of her rich parents. So to fly the nest faster, she began dating Anton and soon married him. Her parents were against this marriage, especially her mother, Victoria Alexandrovna. She believed that the groom was not suitable for her daughter's status. He was from an ordinary family, worked as an ordinary manager, had no business of his own. Although he had an apartment, but her mother-in-law did not like this 2-bedroom in a panel house. Victoria Alexandrovna thought that Oksana was too good and educated for such a life. The couple had been together for 5 years. They were supposed to have an anniversary. Except that life took an unexpected turn. One morning, Oksana's husband left his car in the parking lot and took a cab to work. He and his coworkers were going to sit in a bar after work. Anton didn't come back very late. His wife was watching TV at the time. When she heard her husband come in, she said she was going to bed. One sleeping set was already lying on the couch. So Oksana showed that they were sleeping separately tonight. "I do not want you to breathe your breath on me," she said. Her husband was surprised. She had never said anything like that before. Anton thought that her mother must have said something again, and brainwashed her daughter about her chosen one. The weekend passed. On Monday, Anton went to the underground parking lot to his car. As he got closer, he noticed a fresh scratch on the rear passenger door. The car had been parked here since Friday, which meant it had happened in the parking lot. Anton sighed heavily and decided to look on the DVR to see who had done it. He was finally glad he bought himself a DVR with a dual camera. The beauty of this camera is that you can see not only what is happening on the road, but also in the cabin. He had enough time before work, so he decided to rewind the recorder. He started on Friday, and in that day's recording, he saw something strange. In the evening, his wife got in the car for some reason. She was looking out the passenger window and smiling. After a couple of seconds, a man sat in the front seat. Anton didn't even recognize his neighbor Sergei. Why they met in the car, his husband thought. At first they sat and chatted, but after just a couple of minutes, everything became clear. Oksana began stroking her neighbor's hand, and he in turn leaned into her and kissed her passionately. What followed was the reclining of the seats, the undressing, and the cheating of his wife. Anton was in complete shock at what he had just seen in great detail. The Sarapina on the door, he no longer cared much. He looked at the time, which was on the video. Just at that moment, he was in a bar with friends. Now it was clear why she met him so cold in the evening and went to bed so early. Sergei's neighbor's wife had recently given birth and was on maternity leave, and was constantly at home with the baby. And in Anton's apartment, they were afraid to be alone because his grandmother lived next door and kept an eye on everything, gathering and spreading all the local gossip. Because of this, they decided to choose a neutral option nearby. Sergei didn't have a car, and here Oksana's husband had so luckily left his. Anton squeezed the steering wheel with anger. Oksana will pay for her betrayal, he thought. Anton was a calm man, sometimes even seemed cold and aloof. He was calculating and tried to think through all the steps, did not cut off his shoulders. And to the offender, he preferred to apply subtle ways of revenge. Oksana was very worried what her parents would think of her. Anton realized that his wife had completely lost interest in work. She liked to relax and go shopping. Their joint budget was not enough for her wants, and she was very happy when mom and dad gave her some brand name clothes. So she tried not to disappoint her parents. The idea of a surprise for Oksana and her family came to Anton's mind very quickly. From one day to the next, they were getting ready to celebrate their wedding anniversary. The plan was to invite his parents to their home and sit in a domestic circle. There he decided to show them what their little girl was really like. Anton called his parents and invited them to the party. He told his parents that they would not celebrate, but would just sit in a cafe. The evening came. Oksana somehow made a salad and something hot. Victoria Alexandrovna came with her husband. She immediately began to look contemptuously at Anton's apartment. The woman showed with all her appearance that it was unpleasant for her to be here, and she came only for her daughter. When everyone was seated and they began to eat, Anton took the floor. "Oksana, I have a little surprise for you. Yes, and it will be very interesting for parents too." The man caught his mother-in-law's reproachful look and then turned on the video, which he had prepared in advance. It was a video of all those years of vacationing. Oksana cheered and clapped happily at Vladoshi. But then the video from the DVR came on, and at the most interesting place. The mother-in-law covered her mouth with her hands in horror, and Oksana, losing her power of speech, bulged her eyes. Only the father sat gloomy, unhappily transferred his gaze to his daughter. By the way, Sergei, whom you could watch on the screen, is married and is raising a young child. And now, dear guests, you can take your treasure home. At that moment, Oksana cried, and Victoria Alexandrovna's face turned red with humiliation. She stood up abruptly, took her purse, and headed for the exit. Her father-in-law threw a look at Anton Mura, even a little guilty, grabbed Oksana by the arm and led her out. She kept crying and proving something to her father. And Anton was left alone in the apartment. He sat down on the sofa, poured himself a glass full of expensive cognac, drank it in a gulp. A warm feeling, the accomplishment of the place, poured over his whole body. Next story. I trusted my wife completely until I found out her dirty secret. She was seeing another man behind my back and I didn't know about it. But when I found out, I wasn't just angry, I was devastated. So I came up with a plan to make her pay for what she had done to me. And let me tell you, it was a revenge she will never forget. Nikita and Ksenia had been together for 5 years. The husband had recently been promoted. He worked a lot of hours and often went on small business trips. The wife did not like the fact that they spent so little time together. Yes, these trips paid good money for their town, but what kind of attitude was it when the spouses spent most of their time apart? She really missed her husband's attention, and sometimes he was so tired that he was exhausted. There was no time to talk about life and how anyone's day was going. Around this time, Ksenia had a new co-worker, Vyacheslav, at work. A young man, full of strength and energy, immediately began to show interest in the woman, not working or even friendly. She had already forgotten what it was like when a man wooed her, and she was pleased to receive such attention from him. But she did not allow herself too much with him. She was a married woman after all. They talked and got to know each other for several months. Vyacheslav turned out to be a very interesting and deep person. They started to communicate more and more in social networks, and the subjects of their conversations became more and more personal and even intimate. Another business trip of the husband began. Ksenia was sitting at home on her day off and was frankly bored with nothing to do. She began to correspond with Vyacheslav, who always managed to cheer her up somehow. When she complained to him of the incredible boredom, he invited her to go together to the movies just in the rental of an interesting comedy. "That should cheer her up. Shall we go?" he asked her. The woman didn't answer his message for a long time, thinking how it would look from the outside. She's a married woman going to the movies with some other man. It seems kind of uncool, but they are being friendly. Glory just saves her from a dreary evening, and it's not a date at all. Justifying herself, Ksenia agreed to Vyacheslav's invitation. The man behaved like a gentleman during the whole meeting, not overstepping the boundaries of the permitted. After the movie, they walked around the park for a while, and then the words offered to take Ksenia home. It was getting late when they arrived at the right house. The man half-jokingly asked, would she like to invite him over for tea? She agreed out of hospitality. That was her mistake. When the woman had already put the kettle on and started offering different kinds of tea to choose from, Vyacheslav spotted a bottle of wine on one of the shelves. "Tiusha, it was such a wonderful evening. Let's end it on a good note and drink wine," he suggested, smiling slyly. After a few glasses and not at all friendly conversation, the man began to shower the woman with compliments and even embraced her. He talked about how beautiful she was, how much he had fallen in love with her at first sight, how much he had been looking forward to meeting her. At one point, Ksenia's heart even tingled. She missed these words from her husband, who was just gone for days at work. From the alcohol she drank and the words she heard, the woman melted, and after a short time, she stopped thinking about her husband and what she was doing. That evening, everything happened right in the couple's apartment. In the morning, Ksenia woke up and saw that she was not alone in bed, and with horror grabbed her head. What she had done, how she could do this to her husband. She had been sitting in the kitchen for a long time, staring at one point, when Slava finally woke up and came to her. But instead of a kiss and a good morning, she unexpectedly heard that all last night Ksenia considered it a mistake. She was very sorry that all this had happened. "You just tell your husband about it and go to my place," the man said, sincerely not understanding what could have changed overnight. "No, I can't. Just go, please," she replied. For the next 2 weeks, Ksenia nullified all communication with her colleague. She felt terribly guilty before her husband and only now realized how good and dear he was to her. When Nikita returned from a business trip, she just could not be happy with him. She became more attentive to her husband, constantly talking to him about her love. She decided that she would never admit to cheating on him. She knew that it would cause Nikita incredible pain. But that was no longer for her to decide. One day, Ksenia came home from work and found her spouse in the kitchen. In front of him was a shot glass and a large stack of some papers. Her wife immediately sensed something bad. Her heart began to beat anxiously. At first she thought it might be work-related, but when she got closer she saw that it was her printed correspondence with a colleague, and like the cherry on top of the cake on the pile was a printed photo. On it was a half-naked Ksenia sleeping peacefully in bed. Just the night she cheated on her spouse. A colleague could not bear such an attitude from Ksenia, so he decided to tell her husband everything. It is difficult to convey what Nikita felt at that moment. When he saw a large envelope on the doorstep of his apartment, he was surprised. He was not expecting a parcel from anyone. He opened it with curiosity, but when he opened it, and the first thing he took out was the printed photo of his wife. The ground almost fell out from under his feet. He quickly went into the kitchen, sat down at the table, and took out the entire contents of the envelope, and there were a considerable number of sheets. Already on the third page, he could not read any further, He took a bottle of strong alcohol out of the cabinet, and when he had already finished reading all the correspondence between his wife and her lover, she came home and found her husband there. He said practically nothing while his wife tried to explain herself and ask for forgiveness. It was as if Nikita wasn't even listening to her. His mind was spinning with questions. Why? Why everything was like this? Only when his wife's inappropriate sobs became completely unbearable. He said in a very gloomy voice, "Pack your things and just leave now. I had nothing more to talk about." Ksenia fell silent and with a tearful face went to get her suitcase. For a few days, the man did not dry out and thought a lot about this situation. And then he realized that this way he did not help anything. The marriage was ruined, he was not ready to forgive his spouse now, and it is unlikely he ever will. So he filed for divorce. Ksenia had enough sense not to claim what was rightfully belonged to her. She generally carefully avoided the company of a cheating spouse. Nikita did not take revenge on Ksenia. He considered revenge to be a miserable, unworthy waste of precious time. In any case, she was going to live with the fact that she was an unfaithful wife, and the relationship that haunted her was bound to come out. And who would need her with such a track record is a big question.